You ever walk into a room knowing everyone already decided who you were? The crystal chandeliers above cold dynamics shimmered like frozen stars, throwing pale gold reflections across the polished black conference table as Claire Bennett hurried through the executive floor balancing a tray of sparkling water she had never been asked to carry before. The heel she bought 2 years ago from a clearance rack pinched the back of her ankles with every step, but she kept moving anyway, shoulders straight, chin lifted, pretending she belonged somewhere inside this world of tailored suits and million-dollar conversations. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glowed beneath a cold November rain, silver headlights streaking down Lexington Avenue 30 floors below. Claire carefully placed the final glass near the head of the table, just as the conference room doors swung open. Executives poured inside, laughing softly, expensive watches catching the light. Then he entered. Adrian Cole, 6'2". Dark charcoal suit fitted perfectly across broad shoulders. Calm gray eyes that rarely revealed emotion. The billionaire founder of Cole Dynamics moved through the room with the effortless stillness of someone used to being watched. Claire lowered her gaze immediately, reaching for the empty tray. "Careful, sweetheart." A woman's voice cut through the room sharply. Claire turned too fast. The edge of the tray clipped a champagne flute beside Vanessa Hale's designer handbag. Pale gold liquid splashed across the front of Vanessa's cream-colored silk dress. Silence. Absolute silence. Claire's stomach dropped. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Vanessa stared down at the stain in disbelief before letting out a cold little laugh. "Of course." She dabbed the fabric with a napkin, eyes narrowing at Claire like she was something unpleasant dragged in from the rain. "Maybe your assistant belongs in the kitchen, Adrian." A few executives shifted awkwardly. One man smirked behind his coffee cup. Claire felt heat crawl in her face. She wanted the floor to split open beneath her. Adrian stood near the head of the table, expression unreadable. For one long second, he said nothing. Then his gaze flicked toward Claire. "No," he replied coolly. "She belongs at the gala with me." Every head turned. Claire blinked, certain she heard him wrong. Vanessa's smile disappeared. "Excuse me." Adrian loosened one cuff calmly. "Saturday night. Since apparently my social life has become boardroom entertainment, I'll save everyone the trouble." His eyes landed briefly on Claire again. "You're coming with me." The room exploded into nervous laughter. Someone whispered, "This should be interesting." Claire forced herself not to react, but her fingers tightened painfully around the tray. She understood what this was. A performance. A billionaire proving he could turn anyone into an accessory for one night. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You're bringing her to the Hawthorne Gala? That's usually what with me means." Adrian slid into his chair as though the conversation bored him already. "Meeting starts now." Claire stood frozen another second before slipping quietly out of the room. The moment the doors closed behind her, she exhaled shakily. Her reflection stared back from the dark glass wall across the hallway. Cheap blouse, tired eyes, hair pinned back too quickly this morning. She looked exactly like someone who didn't belong at a $5 million charity gala attended by New York's elite. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Dad." Claire swallowed before answering. "Hey." Her father's voice sounded weak but warm through the speaker. "You at work, kiddo?" She closed her eyes briefly. "Yeah. Doctor says the surgery bill came in." "Of course it did." Claire leaned against the wall beside the elevator, staring at the rain sliding down the windows outside. 3 overdue notices sat unopened on her kitchen counter. Rent was already 8 days late. Her checking account had less than $40 in it. "I'll figure it out," she whispered. "You always say that." "Because I always do." The elevator dinged softly behind her. Claire quickly wiped beneath one eye before anyone could see. The executive assistant from accounting stepped out carrying folders and gave her a sympathetic look. "Claire," she said carefully, "Mr. Cole wants your measurements sent to his event coordinator by tonight." Claire stared at her. "My what?" "For the gown." The woman hesitated before lowering her voice. "Honestly, half the company thinks he's doing this to make Vanessa jealous." Claire managed a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, she said softly. I figured that out already. But later that night, standing alone inside her tiny queen's apartment, while sirens echoed faintly outside and rain tapped against the fire escape, Claire pulled an old midnight blue garment bag from the back of her closet. Her mother's dress. Vintage satin. Elegant even after all these years. She brushed trembling fingers across the fabric while the city lights flickered through the window beside her. Then slowly, almost afraid to hope, Claire whispered to her own reflection, maybe one night is enough to change everything. The next morning, Claire arrived at Cold Dynamics 20 minutes early, carrying a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold during the subway ride from Queens. The lobby smelled faintly of polished marble and expensive perfume, the kind of scent that made people like her feel temporary the second they walked through the revolving doors. She stepped toward the elevators quietly, hoping nobody would mention yesterday's humiliation again, but the second she entered the executive floor, she felt it. Eyes following her. Whispers stopping the moment she passed. One assistant glanced up from her desk and immediately looked away. Another smiled too politely. Claire tightened her grip around the coffee cup and kept walking. Her desk sat outside Adrian Cole's private office, perfectly organized except for the thick cream-colored envelope waiting beside her keyboard. She froze. Her name was written across the front in elegant black lettering. Claire Bennett. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten itinerary for Saturday's gala, a temporary security badge for the Hawthorne Hotel ballroom, and an appointment card for a luxury, stylish downtown. At the bottom, one line had been added in sharp masculine handwriting. Do not be late. Claire stared at the words for several seconds before quietly sitting down. Of course there was no. Please. No explanation either. Just instructions. Like she was another item on Adrian Cole's calendar. Her computer screen flickered awake moments before his office door opened behind her. Inside, Claire stood immediately, smoothing her sleeves before stepping into the office. Adrian's corner suite overlooked the Manhattan skyline like a private kingdom above the city. Gray rain clouds hung low beyond the glass, while soft jazz played somewhere near the bookshelf wall. Adrian stood near the espresso machine, pouring coffee into a black ceramic mug. He did not look at her right away. Closed the door. She obeyed quietly. You wanted to see me? You did not answer my coordinator last night. His voice was calm, controlled. About the gown. Claire folded her hands together. I already have something to wear. That finally made him glance toward her. The gala is black tie. I know. Then you also know your dress probably does not fit the event. Claire felt the sting immediately, even though his tone barely changed. She lifted her chin slightly. It belonged to my mother. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Small, almost invisible, then gone. Fine, he said at last. Wear it. Claire blinked, surprised he had not argued. Adrian crossed the room slowly, setting down his coffee beside a stack of financial reports. Up close, he looked even more intimidating in daylight. Sharp jawline, expensive watch glinting beneath his cuff. Eyes had always seemed 3 thoughts ahead of everyone else. Saturday is important, he said. There will be investors, media, politicians. You do not speak unless spoken to. You stay beside me unless I say otherwise. And whatever happens, he paused briefly. Do not let Vanessa bait you. Claire almost laughed at that. You think she needs encouragement? Adrian ignored the comment. Can you handle one night? Claire met his gaze directly for the first time since entering the office. I have handled worse than rich people judging me. Silence settled between them. For one strange second, Adrian looked at her differently. Not amused. Not cold either. Just thoughtful. Then his phone buzzed sharply across the desk. The moment. Vanished. You can go. Claire turned toward the door, but his voice stopped her again. Claire. She glanced back. Adrian hesitated faintly before speaking. About yesterday in the conference room, she waited. Do not take Vanessa personally. She treats everyone like a transaction. Claire gave a soft, humorless smile. Maybe that is why she fits in here better than I do. Before he could answer, she slipped out of the office and closed the door behind her. By late afternoon, Rain hammered against the city hard enough to blur the streets below into silver streaks. Claire sat alone during lunch break, scrolling through old hospital payment reminders on her phone while chewing half a sandwich she could barely taste. Then another message appeared. Final eviction notice. Payment required within 72 hours. Her chest tightened instantly. She locked the screen and stared at the ceiling for a moment, breathing carefully. Across the office, employees discussed weekend plans, Hampton's reservations, and private charity auctions like money was something endless and ordinary. Claire quietly opened her desk drawer instead. Inside rested a faded photograph of her mother wearing the same midnight blue dress, now hanging in Claire's apartment closet. Elegant is how you make people feel. Her mother used to say that every time Claire apologized for not being rich enough, pretty enough, polished enough. Claire traced the edge of the photo gently before slipping it back into the drawer, just as another shadow stopped beside her desk. Vanessa had perfect makeup, diamond earrings catching the fluorescent lights. You really think the Cinderella act is going to work? Vanessa asked softly. Claire looked up carefully. I'm just attending a gala. Vanessa leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. No, you are being used to make a point. Her smile sharpened. The sad part is, I do not think you even realize it yet. Then she walked away, heels clicking across the marble floor while Claire sat frozen behind her desk, trying not to admit how much those words hurt, because somewhere deep down, she already feared they were true. Saturday arrived wrapped in freezing rain and pale gray skies that turned Manhattan into a blur of headlights and reflections. Claire stood alone inside her tiny apartment bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror while the old radiator hissed unevenly beside the sink. For a long moment, she almost convinced herself not to go. The midnight blue dress hung from the shower rod behind her, soft satin catching the weak overhead light like dark water. It still looked beautiful, timeless. Her mother had worn it once to a charity concert 20 years earlier when Claire was little enough to hide beneath restaurant tables and watch wealthy people laugh over crystal glasses she was afraid to touch. Back then, her mother used to whisper, "Money impresses people for 5 minutes. Gray stays in their memory forever." Claire swallowed hard and reached carefully for the dress. 45 minutes later, a black town car waited outside her building while rain tapped softly against the windows. Neighbors peeked through curtains as Claire stepped onto the sidewalk wearing the midnight blue gown and a borrowed wool coat too thin for the weather. The driver opened the rear door without speaking. Inside, warm leather seats smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. Adrian sat near the opposite window, scrolling through emails on his phone. He looked up the second she entered. Silence. Real silence this time. Claire suddenly became very aware of the old pearl earrings she wore and the tiny repaired seam near her wrist. Adrian slowly lowered the phone into his lap. His eyes moved across the dress, once before returning to her face. "You wore it," he said quietly. Claire closed the door beside her. "I said I would." Another pause settled between them as the car pulled into traffic. Outside, Manhattan shimmered beneath rain-soaked neon and blurred taxi lights. Finally, Adrian spoke again. "You look," he stopped himself. Claire waited. He glanced back toward the window. Appropriate for the event. She almost smiled at the awkwardness of it. "That might be the nicest thing you have ever said to me." Adrian let out the faintest breath of amusement before straightening his cufflinks again. "Do not get used to it." 20 minutes. Later, the Hawthorne Hotel rose above Park Avenue, glowing gold against the stormy night sky. Valets rushed beneath giant black umbrellas, while cameras flashed nonstop near the entrance staircase. Claire's stomach tightened immediately. "There are reporters everywhere," she whispered. Adrian looked calm as ever. "Ignore them." Easy for him to say. The moment the car stopped, photographers surged forward shouting his name. "Adrian, over here. Who is your date tonight? Is Vanessa inside already?" Claire froze slightly until Adrian stepped out first and extended his hand toward her without hesitation. She stared at it for half a second. Strong fingers. Steady. Waiting. Then slowly, she placed her hand in his. Camera flashes exploded instantly. Adrian guided her up the wet marble stairs beside him while reporters shouted questions from every direction. Claire kept her eyes forward, heart hammering so loudly she barely heard anything else. Inside, warmth swallowed them immediately. Crystal chandeliers stretched across the ballroom ceiling like constellations while a live orchestra played near a massive ice sculpture surrounded by white roses. Women glittered in diamonds. Men laughed over whiskey and million-dollar investments. Claire felt every inch of her queen's apartment still clinging invisibly to her skin. Adrian leaned slightly closer as they walked. Breathe. She blinked. What? You stopped. Claire realized he was right. She had been holding her breath since the staircase outside. Do not apologize for being nervous. His voice lowered. Most people in this room are terrified too. They just hide it better. Before Claire could answer, several executives approached them, smiling too widely. Introductions blurred together. Venture capitalists, politicians, fashion editors. Everyone stared at Claire with polished curiosity. Some recognized her from gossip spreading through Cold Dynamics all week. Others clearly assumed she was another temporary social distraction for Adrian Cole. Then came Vanessa. She crossed the ballroom in a silver gown that sparkled beneath the chandeliers like shattered glass. Her smile looked perfect from a distance. Up close, it felt sharp enough to cut. Adrian, she said smoothly before turning toward Claire. Well, you clean up better than expected. Claire forced a calm smile. Nice to see you too. Vanessa glanced at the midnight blue dress carefully. Vintage. Claire nodded once. My mother's. How sentimental. Adrian's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Vanessa. A warning. Vanessa only smiled wider. Relax. I am being welcoming. Then a waiter passing nearby suddenly stumbled slightly after another guest bumped his shoulder. A tray tilted dangerously toward an older woman standing near the orchestra platform. Without thinking, Claire stepped forward fast enough to steady both the tray and the woman before disaster hit the white marble floor. Easy, Claire said softly, helping the startled waiter regain balance. The older woman pressed one hand against her chest. Thank you, dear. Around them, several guests paused to watch. The waiter looked mortified. I'm so sorry, ma'am. Claire gave him a reassuring smile. It was an accident. Adrian watched the entire interaction silently from a few feet away. Something unreadable flickered behind his eyes again. Not amusement. Not pity. Something else. Then the older woman looked closer at Claire's dress and suddenly smiled warmly. That shade of blue, she said softly. It reminds me of the New York Philharmonic Winter Gala in 1998. Claire blinked in surprise. My mother attended that concert. The woman's eyes widened slightly. Wait, Eleanor Bennett. Claire stared. You knew her? Everyone in the arts community knew Eleanor Bennett. The woman smiled gently. Your mother played violin beautifully. Across the ballroom, Adrian slowly turned toward Claire with a look that said he was realizing for the very first time. There was far more to her story than he ever bothered to ask. The orchestra resumed moments later, soft violin notes drifting through the ballroom like smoke beneath the chandeliers, but Adrian barely heard any of it. His attention remained fixed on Claire as she stood beside the older woman near the orchestra platform, speaking with quiet confidence that felt completely different from the nervous assistant he had expected tonight. Guests had started watching her now, not because of scandal, not because she was standing beside a billionaire, because somehow, without trying, she made people feel comfortable around her. Your mother performed at Lincoln Center 3 times, the older woman said warmly. Eleanor Bennett had extraordinary stage presence. Claire smiled faintly, though sadness flickered behind her eyes. I was only 9 when she passed away. I'm sorry, dear. Adrian stepped closer before he even realized he was moving. You never mentioned your mother was a musician. Claire looked up at him calmly. You never asked. The words were gentle, but they landed harder than criticism. Adrian held her gaze a second too long before another guest approached the group excitedly. Margaret, they still need someone for the donor performance upstairs. The older woman sighed immediately. Oh, this night gets worse every minute. Claire blinked. What happened? The featured violinist became ill 20 minutes ago. Margaret pressed fingers lightly against her temple. Now half the board members are panicking because the donor presentation opens in less than 15 minutes. Adrian glanced toward the grand staircase, where hotel staff rushed nervously between floors. Hire another musician. At this hour? Margaret laughed softly. Every decent violinist in Manhattan is already performing somewhere tonight. Claire looked toward the orchestra platform instinctively. What piece? Margaret stared at her. Excuse me? What were they supposed to perform? Winter from Vivaldi. Claire's expression shifted almost invisibly. Adrian noticed immediately. You know it, he said quietly. Claire hesitated. I used to. Margaret suddenly leaned closer. Could you still play? Claire almost laughed from nerves alone. Not in front of 500 wealthy strangers. That is not a no, Margaret replied. Adrian studied Claire carefully. When was the last time you played? About 10 years ago. 10 years. Life got expensive. Something about the way she said it made Adrian's chest tighten unexpectedly. Margaret touched Claire's arm gently. You would be saving this entire evening. Claire looked horrified. I cannot just walk onto a ballroom stage. Why not? Adrian asked quietly. She turned toward him immediately. Because I am an assistant from Queens wearing my dead mother's dress. Adrian's expression softened for the first time all night. No, he said calmly. You are the daughter of Eleanor Bennett. Silence settled between them again while the orchestra continued softly downstairs. Claire looked between Adrian and Margaret, panic and uncertainty battling visibly behind her eyes. What if I embarrass myself? Adrian took one slow step closer. Then you embarrass yourself. She blinked at him. That is your motivational speech? One corner of his mouth almost lifted. I'm still working on those. Despite herself, Claire laughed quietly. The sound surprised both of them. Then Margaret clasped her hands together hopefully. Please. Claire inhaled slowly. Her mother's voice echoed somewhere deep in memory. Grace stays in their memory forever. Finally, she nodded once. 15 minutes later, whispers spread rapidly through the upper ballroom as guests settled into their seats for the donor presentation. Crystal glasses clinked softly beneath dimmed lights while executives checked phones and socialites adjusted diamond bracelets beneath the glow of chandeliers. Then the orchestra conductor stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, due to unforeseen circumstances this evening, we are honored to present a very special guest performer. Claire stood behind the curtain, gripping the violin with trembling fingers. The polished wood felt unfamiliar after so many years. Her pulse thundered painfully inside her chest. Adrian stood nearby watching her silently. You can still walk away, he said quietly. Claire stared down at the violin. No, she swallowed carefully. If I run now, I will regret it forever. Adrian nodded once. Then stopped thinking about the room. Easy for you to say. No, he replied softly. It is not. Claire looked up. For one strange second, Adrian Cole no longer seemed like the untouchable billionaire everyone feared downstairs. He looked tired, human, almost lonely. Then, the orchestra conductor signaled toward the stage entrance. Miss Bennett. Claire closed her eyes briefly before stepping forward into the light. The ballroom fell silent almost immediately. Hundreds of faces turned toward her beneath the crystal glow overhead. Claire heard whispers ripple through the room. That is Adrian Cole's date. Who is she? She looks terrified. She probably is. Claire adjusted the violin beneath her chin while her hands trembled hard enough to scare her. Then suddenly, from the front row, she saw Adrian watching her. Calm, steady, not smiling. Just there. Somehow that helped. Claire lifted the bow slowly. The first note cut through the ballroom like winter air. Clear, elegant, beautiful. And within seconds, every whispered judgment in the room disappeared. The final note lingered in the ballroom long after Claire lowered the violin from beneath her chin. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. The kind that only happens when an entire room forgets itself for a moment. Then applause erupted so suddenly it startled her. Hundreds of people rose from their seats beneath the crystal chandeliers, while flashes from phones and cameras burst across the room like lightning. Claire blinked against the brightness, breathing unevenly as she stared out at the crowd. Somewhere near the center table, Margaret stood clapping with tears in her eyes. Even members of the orchestra smiled at Claire with genuine admiration. But the only face Claire searched for was Adrian's. He remained seated in the front row for 1 second longer than everyone else, watching her with an expression she could not read. Then slowly he stood too, and for the first time since she had met him, Adrian Cole looked genuinely stunned. Backstage, afterward became chaos almost instantly. Event organizers rushed toward Claire, praising the performance, while donors asked questions about her mother, her training, her background. Someone handed her champagne she forgot to drink. Another woman insisted she meet the director of a Manhattan Arts Foundation. Claire could barely process any of it. 20 minutes ago, these same people barely looked at her. Now, they acted like she belonged among them. Miss Bennett, your interpretation of Vivaldi was extraordinary. Your mother would be so proud. Are you performing professionally again? Claire smiled politely through the whirlwind of voices, but deep down she still felt like the girl from Queens, standing in borrowed heels, trying not to say the wrong thing. Then Adrian appeared through the crowd, beside the orchestra curtains. Conversations softened instantly around him. He looked at Claire for a long moment before speaking. Come with me. Claire followed him through a quieter hallway lined with gold-framed mirrors and soft wall sconces until they reached a private balcony overlooking Park Avenue. Rain still shimmered across the city below, headlights streaking through the darkness beneath them like rivers of light. For several seconds, neither spoke. The muffled sound of music drifted from inside the ballroom behind them. Claire folded her arms lightly against the cold air. If this is where you tell me I exceeded expectations, I should warn you, I already know. Adrian surprised her by letting out a quiet laugh beneath his breath. You always do that. Do what? Say something sarcastic before anyone else can make you feel uncomfortable. Claire looked away toward the city lights. It usually works. Adrian leaned one hand against the balcony railing. Not tonight. His voice lowered slightly. Tonight, everyone in that room was looking at you like you were the most interesting person there. Claire shook her head softly. No, they were looking at the billionaire's assistant who suddenly became useful entertainment. That is not true. Is it not? She finally turned toward him fully. You invited me here because Vanessa embarrassed you in front of your board. Adrian said nothing. Claire laughed quietly, though sadness sat underneath it now. I know what tonight was, Adrian. Rain tapped softly against the stone balcony around them. Adrian stared at her for a long moment before speaking carefully. At first, maybe, Claire swallowed hard but kept her expression calm. Thank you for the honesty. But that changed. Her eyes flicked toward his immediately. Adrian looked strangely uneasy for the first time all evening. You walked into that ballroom terrified, he said quietly, and somehow you still made everyone around you feel comfortable. Claire blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. Adrian exhaled slowly, gaze drifting briefly toward the city below. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Your world. People here perform constantly. They calculate every conversation, every smile. You look back at her. You do not. Claire's chest tightened unexpectedly. For a second, neither moved. The cold November wind swept lightly through the balcony, while distant traffic hummed below. Then the ballroom doors burst open behind them. There you are, Vanessa said sharply. Claire stepped back instinctively. Vanessa approached in silver heels, eyes fixed entirely on Adrian. The press is asking questions downstairs. Her gaze shifted toward Claire briefly. Apparently your assistant has become the story of the evening. Adrian's expression cooled instantly, and Vanessa crossed her arms. And this little stunt has gone far enough. Claire looked down quietly. There it was. The reminder. Temporary. Decorative. Convenient. Vanessa softened her tone toward Adrian. You made your point tonight. Adrian's jaw tightened faintly. You should head back inside, Vanessa. But Vanessa was not finished. Her eyes moved toward Claire again, smile sharpening. "Tell me something honestly," she asked sweetly. "Did he at least warn you this whole thing started as a joke?" The words hit like ice water. Claire went completely still. Silence swallowed the balcony. Adrian's expression darkened immediately. "Vanessa." Too late. Claire looked at him slowly. Not angry yet. Worse. Hurt. Real hurt. Adrian took a step forward. "Claire," but before he could finish, the ballroom doors opened again behind Vanessa. Several reporters entered, laughing softly with cameras hanging around their necks. One of them held up a phone screen toward another journalist. "You have got to hear this recording," he said. "Somebody leaked it from the boardroom yesterday." Claire's stomach dropped instantly as a familiar voice crackled softly through the speaker. Adrian's voice. Calm. Cold. "Maybe I will bring her." Laughter echoed faintly through the recording. Then another line. "At least the gala might finally become entertaining." The reporters laughed awkwardly. Vanessa smiled slowly, and Claire realized the worst humiliation of the night had not happened yet. The laughter from the reporters faded almost immediately once they realized nobody else on the balcony found the recording amusing. Rain drifted softly through the cold Manhattan air, while the city lights below blurred into silver and gold beneath the storm. Claire stood completely still beside the balcony railing, staring at Adrian like she no longer recognized him. The sound of his own voice still echoed faintly from the reporter's phone inside her head. At least the gala might finally become entertaining. Her chest tightened painfully, not because she had been insulted. She had survived insults before. It was the realization that for one stupid moment tonight, she had actually started believing Adrian saw her as more than a joke. One of the reporters cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mr. Cole, we did not realize." "Leave," Adrian said coldly. Nobody argued. Within seconds, the reporters disappeared back inside the ballroom, suddenly eager to be somewhere else. Vanessa folded her arms slowly, satisfaction flickering across her face. "Well," she said lightly, "that certainly ruined the mood." Adrian turned toward her sharply. "Enough." Vanessa lifted one shoulder. "Do not blame me because the truth sounds ugly out loud." Then she walked back inside, leaving only silence behind her. Adrian looked toward Claire immediately. "Claire!" She stepped backward before he could get closer. "Do not." Her voice was calm. Too calm. That somehow felt worse. Rain tapped softly against the stone balcony between them. Adrian ran one hand through his hair, frustration finally breaking through the polished control he wore like armor. "You heard one conversation taken out of context." Claire laughed quietly without humor. "Really?" "Because it sounded pretty clear to me." "I was angry." "At Vanessa?" Claire nodded slowly. "So you used me?" "No." Adrian took another step closer. "I invited you." Because you needed someone disposable." The words landed hard in the cold air. Adrian stopped moving. Claire swallowed carefully, forcing herself not to cry in front of him. "You know what the worst part is?" she whispered. "I actually defended you tonight." Adrian stared at her silently. "When Vanessa warned me this was all some rich man's game, I thought maybe she was wrong." Claire shook her head softly. "That was stupid." "Claire, listen to me." "No." Her voice cracked slightly now. "You listen." She folded her arms tightly against herself like she was trying to hold together something breaking apart inside her chest. "You have no idea what tonight meant to me." Adrian's expression shifted faintly. "The dress belonged to my mother. The violin was the last thing I had left of her career. I walked into that ballroom terrified everyone would laugh at me." Her eyes finally met his again, and they already were. Adrian looked genuinely shaken now. "I never wanted to humiliate you." Claire smiled sadly. "Maybe that is the problem." Silence stretched painfully between them, while music from the ballroom drifted faintly through the open doors behind Adrian. Somewhere downstairs, people were still laughing, drinking champagne, discussing business deals worth more money than Claire would probably see in her entire lifetime. The world inside kept moving. But out here, everything had stopped. Adrian lowered his voice carefully. "When I asked you to come tonight, yes, part of it was because of Vanessa." Claire looked away toward the city. "Thank you for finally being honest." But that changed the second you walked into the room. She closed her eyes briefly. Please stop. It is true. Adrian stepped closer again, more cautiously this time. You changed the entire atmosphere in there tonight. Not because of the performance. Because of you. Claire shook her head immediately. You do not even know me. I know enough. No, Adrian. She looked at him directly now, tears finally shining in her eyes beneath the balcony lights. You know the version of me that made your evening easier. The words hit him harder than she realized. Adrian stared at her quietly, while rain dampened the shoulders of his suit. For once, he had no perfectly controlled response ready. Claire inhaled slowly before speaking again. I grew up watching my mother perform for wealthy people exactly like this. They applauded her music. They complimented her elegance. Her voice softened painfully. But when she got sick and the money disappeared, nobody came back. Adrian's chest tightened unexpectedly. Claire, do you know what that teaches someone? She asked softly. That people love beauty when it entertains them, not when it needs something. Adrian looked away briefly, jaw tightening hard enough to show beneath the dim balcony lights. I'm not those people. Maybe not. Claire wiped beneath one eye quickly before the tears could fall completely. But you still invited me here for the wrong reason. She stepped past him toward the ballroom doors. Adrian turned immediately. Where are you going? Home. Do not leave like this. Claire stopped near the doorway without facing him. Why? Her voice barely rose above a whisper now. Because the billionaire is suddenly worried what people might think. Adrian flinched almost invisibly. Claire looked back one final time. You know what is funny? She said softly. Tonight was the first time in years I felt like the daughter my mother believed I could become. Her eyes lowered briefly, and somehow you made me feel small again in less than 5 minutes. Then she disappeared into the ballroom crowd before Adrian could stop her, leaving him alone on the rain-covered balcony while the realization settled slowly and painfully into his chest that somewhere between the boardroom joke and the sound of her violin beneath those chandeliers, he had completely underestimated the woman walking away from him now. Claire barely remembered leaving the hotel. One moment crystal chandeliers glowed above her through blurred tears, and the next she was standing beneath the freezing rain outside the Hawthorne Hotel while black cars swept past on Park Avenue, spraying silver water across the curb. Her breath shook hard in the cold air. She wrapped her thin coat tighter around herself and started walking. Before anyone could stop her, behind her, flashes from cameras still exploded near the entrance staircase while wealthy guests drifted inside, laughing beneath umbrellas carried by hotel staff. Nobody noticed the girl in the midnight blue dress disappearing into the storm. Or maybe they did and simply looked away. The subway ride back to Queens felt endless. Claire sat alone near the back of the nearly empty train, staring at her reflection in the darkened window as tunnels rushed past outside. Her mascara had smudged slightly beneath her eyes. The pearl earrings from her mother felt suddenly too heavy to wear. Across from her, a little girl around 8 years old looked up from a coloring book and whispered loudly to her mother, "She looks like a princess." Claire almost cried right there on the subway. Instead, she smiled softly at the child before lowering her gaze again. By the time she reached her apartment building, rain had soaked completely through the hem of her gown. The hallway lights flickered weakly as she climbed 3 flights of stairs carrying her heels in one hand. Her phone buzzed 3 times during the walk upstairs. Adrian. Adrian again. Then finally a voicemail notification. Claire ignored all of them. Inside her apartment, silence wrapped around her immediately. Small kitchen. Cracked windows. Bills stacked beside the microwave. Reality waiting exactly where she left it. Claire slowly removed the pearl earrings and placed them beside the framed photograph of her mother on the counter. You were wrong, she whispered quietly into the empty apartment. Grace does not stay in their memory forever. Her phone buzzed again across the table. This time it was not Adrian. It was her landlord. Final reminder. Apartment access changes Monday morning if payment is not received. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Of course. Everything always seemed to collapse at once. Meanwhile, 40 minutes away in Manhattan, The Hawthorne Gala had become chaos. She left. Margaret stared at Adrian in disbelief near the ballroom entrance. Adrian grabbed his coat from a stunned hotel attendant. "Did you see which direction?" "Adrian." Margaret lowered her voice. "Carefully. What exactly happened out there?" Adrian looked toward the rain-covered windows where Claire had vanished less than half an hour earlier. "I was an idiot." It was the most honest thing he had said all night. Across the ballroom, executives whispered openly now, while social media clips from Claire's violin performance spread rapidly online. Half the city seemed obsessed with the mysterious woman beside Adrian Cole. Unfortunately, the leaked boardroom recording was spreading just as quickly. Vanessa stood near the champagne tower pretending not to notice the damage unfolding around her. Adrian crossed the ballroom directly toward her. Guests immediately moved aside. "You leaked the recording." Vanessa lifted one elegant shoulder. "I exposed the truth." "No," Adrian's voice dropped colder now. "You humiliated someone who did nothing to you." Vanessa laughed softly. "Interesting. Suddenly the assistant matters." Adrian stared at her without blinking. "More than you do." The words hit hard enough to wipe the smile from her face completely. Nearby conversations stopped instantly. Vanessa folded her arms tightly. "You cannot seriously be defending her right now." Adrian glanced briefly around the ballroom, filled with people pretending not to listen. "You know what the difference is between Claire and everyone in this room?" His eyes returned to Vanessa. "She never once tried to impress me." Vanessa scoffed quietly. "Please." And somehow she still became the most unforgettable person here tonight. Silence spread outward through the nearby guests. Adrian reached into his jacket calmly before removing his company access card from the inside pocket. "Your consulting contract with Cole Dynamics is over." Vanessa stared at him. "You are firing me?" "No," Adrian's expression remained ice cold. "I am removing someone who mistakes cruelty for sophistication." Then he walked away before she could answer. 15 minutes later, Adrian sat alone inside the back of a black town car, speeding through rain-covered Manhattan streets, while Claire's voicemail played unanswered through his phone for the fourth time. "Claire." His voice sounded rougher now, less controlled. "I know you're angry. You should be." Traffic lights reflected red across the wet windows beside him. Adrian rubbed one hand across his jaw slowly before continuing. "But tonight was not fake for me." Silence filled the car briefly. Somewhere between hearing you play violin and watching you calm an entire room without even trying, he exhaled quietly. "I forgot this started as a game." The voicemail timer ticked down softly. "You said I made you feel small." His voice lowered almost to a whisper now. "The truth is, you're the first person who has made me feel ashamed of the man I became." The message ended moments later. Adrian stared down at the phone screen while rain hammered softly against the city outside. Then his driver glanced up through the rearview mirror. "Sir," Adrian looked toward the glowing skyline ahead. "Take me to Queens." Queens looked different after midnight. Quieter, colder. The rain had finally slowed to a soft mist drifting through empty side streets while neon signs buzzed faintly above closed laundromats and corner stores. Adrian stepped out of the town car, wearing the same charcoal suit from the gala, except now rain had softened the sharp edges of it. The billionaire who usually moved through penthouses and private elevators stood silently on a cracked sidewalk staring up at Claire's apartment building like he had entered another world entirely. "You want me to wait here, sir?" the driver asked carefully from inside the car. Adrian nodded once. "Yeah." He climbed the narrow staircase slowly, passing flickering hallway lights and chipped paint along the walls. Somewhere down the corridor, an old television played softly behind a closed door. The building smelled faintly of coffee and radiator heat. Normal, human, real. Adrian stopped outside apartment 3B and hesitated for the first time all night. Then finally he knocked. No answer. He knocked again, softer this time. A few seconds later, the locks turned slowly. Claire opened the door wearing sweatpants and an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders now. She froze immediately the second she saw him standing there. Neither spoke. Rainwater still clung lightly too. Adrian's coat, while the hallway light cast tired shadows beneath his eyes. Claire looked exhausted too. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. Adrian swallowed once before answering. "I needed to see you." Claire almost laughed from disbelief. "At 1 in the morning? You stopped answering my calls. Maybe there was a reason for that." Silence settled between them again. Adrian glanced briefly past her shoulder into the apartment. Tiny kitchen, fold-out table, stacks of hospital paperwork beside a lamp missing part of its shade. Nothing about Claire's life looked easy. Something tightened painfully inside his chest. Claire crossed her arms lightly. "You should go." "Not yet." Adrian's voice lowered carefully. "Please." The word surprised her enough that she hesitated. Adrian Cole did not sound like a billionaire standing in her hallway anymore. He sounded like a man trying not to lose something important before he fully understood why it mattered. Finally, Claire stepped aside silently. Adrian entered slowly. The apartment felt impossibly small compared to the spaces he normally occupied, but somehow warmer too. A faded quilt rested over the couch. Books stacked unevenly near the windowsill. Framed photographs lined the shelves beside an old violin case. Adrian's eyes stopped there immediately. "You kept it." Claire closed the door behind him quietly. "It is all I have left of her." Adrian moved closer to the violin case, carefully, almost respectfully. "Why did you stop playing?" Claire leaned against the kitchen counter. "Because my mother died." Her voice remained calm, but sadness lived underneath every word. Medical bills destroyed everything after that. Lessons became groceries. Concerts became rent payments. Adrian looked down briefly. "I did not know." Claire gave a tired smile. That is the thing about rich people. They usually do not ask questions once someone stops being useful to them. The words landed hard because both of them knew she was not only talking about her mother anymore. Adrian turned toward her slowly. "I deserve that." Claire looked away toward the rain-streaked windows. "Then why are you here?" Adrian exhaled quietly before answering. "Because tonight I realized something I should have understood a long time ago." Claire stayed silent. Adrian stepped closer carefully, his voice lower now. "I built my entire life around control. Business deals, public image, strategy." He shook his head faintly. "And somewhere along the way, I became the kind of person who could invite a woman to a gala for the wrong reason and not think twice about it." Claire folded her arms tighter around herself. "You cannot apologize your way out of humiliation." "I know." Adrian met her eyes directly. "That is why I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight." The apartment fell quiet except for distant rain tapping softly against the windows outside. Adrian reached slowly into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded paper envelope. Claire frowned slightly. "What is that?" "Something I should have given you before the gala." He handed it to her carefully. Claire opened the envelope slowly and froze. Inside was a legal notice from her landlord stamped paid in full. She looked up immediately. "Adrian, before you get angry," he interrupted softly, "it is not charity." Claire's expression hardened instantly anyway. "Then what is it?" Adrian held her gaze steadily. "An investment." "In what?" His eyes moved briefly toward the violin case resting beside the shelf. "In the woman who walked into a ballroom full of people designed to intimidate her, and somehow made every single one of them feel smaller than her kindness." Claire stared at him speechless. Adrian took one careful step closer. "Tomorrow morning, the Manhattan Arts Foundation is announcing a new community music program." Claire blinked. "What?" "Margaret called me an hour ago. She wants you to run it." Claire laughed softly in disbelief. "I am an assistant who has not touched a violin in 10 years. "No," Adrian said quietly. "You are Claire Bennett." His voice softened even further. "And after tonight, everybody finally knows it." Claire looked down at the paid notice, still trembling slightly in her hands. For the first time since leaving the gala, the tightness inside her chest cracked just enough to let something dangerous back in. Hope. 1 year later, the first snowfall of December drifted softly across Manhattan like scattered pieces of white silk, covering the city in a quiet glow that made even the busiest streets feel slower for a moment. Inside the newly restored Bennett Art Center on West 42nd Street, warm golden lights reflected across polished wooden floors while the sound of violins echoed gently through the building. Children hurried between rehearsal rooms, carrying sheet music and instrument cases almost too large for their shoulders, laughter spilling into the hallways between classes. Claire stood near the entrance balcony overlooking the main recital room below, watching a 12-year-old girl nervously practice scales beside a piano. "Relax your shoulders," Claire called gently. "Music sounds better when you stop trying to be perfect." The girl smiled shyly before trying again. This time the notes came easier. Claire smiled to herself. 1 year ago, she could barely afford rent. Now the Community Music Foundation she directed had expanded across 3 boroughs, offering free lessons to families who otherwise could never dream of private arts education. Margaret called it the fastest-growing arts initiative in New York. Claire still called it impossible. But every morning when she unlocked the front doors and heard music filling the building her mother would have loved, something inside her healed a little more. "You're thinking again." Claire turned at the familiar voice behind her. Adrian stood near the hallway entrance, wearing a dark wool coat dusted lightly with snowflakes. His gray scarf loosened at the collar. Even after a year, something about seeing him in ordinary moments still caught her off guard. Not because he looked powerful, because around her now, he no longer tried to. Claire folded her arms lightly against the balcony railing. "You are late." Adrian walked closer slowly. "I had to finish a board meeting." Poor Billionaire. One corner of his mouth lifted faintly. "You used to sound more sympathetic." "I evolved." Adrian stopped beside her, overlooking the recital room below. Soft violin music drifted upward beneath the warm lights while students moved through the hall carrying instruments and sheet music. He watched quietly for a moment before speaking. "You built all this in 12 months. Claire shook her head softly. "No." Her eyes moved toward the classrooms below. "People just finally gave these kids a chance." Adrian glanced toward her carefully. "You gave them one." Silence settled comfortably between them now. Nothing like the sharp, painful silences from a year earlier. Those had slowly disappeared somewhere between late-night planning meetings, fundraiser disasters, shared takeout dinners inside empty rehearsal halls, and 100 tiny moments where Adrian learned how to exist around someone who never cared about his money nearly as much as his honesty. Claire looked toward him suddenly. "Did you know Mrs. Alvarez cried yesterday because her son got accepted into Juilliard Prep?" Adrian smiled softly. "You cried too. That is not the point." "It absolutely is." Claire laughed quietly beneath her breath. Adrian watched her for a second longer than necessary. He still did that sometimes. Like he was afraid the woman who changed his life might disappear if he looked away too long. Downstairs, applause suddenly erupted as another student finished rehearsing. Claire smiled proudly toward the recital room. Then she noticed Adrian had gone strangely quiet beside her. "What?" Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his coat slowly. Claire immediately narrowed her eyes. "Adrian, just let me finish before you panic." That sentence has never ended well. He laughed softly under his breath before pulling out a small folded card instead of a jewelry box. Claire blinked in surprise. "What is that?" Adrian handed it to her carefully. Claire unfolded the card slowly and froze. It was the original Gala invitation from 1 year earlier. The edges were slightly worn now. Across the bottom, beneath the printed event details, Adrian had written something by hand. "The night I invited you to impress a room full of strangers and accidentally met the most important person in my life." Claire looked up speechless. Adrian's voice lowered gently. "I spent years believing power was the same thing as worth." Snow drifted softly outside the tall windows behind them while distant city lights glowed against the evening sky. "Then you walked into that ballroom, wearing your mother's dress, and reminded me what real elegance actually looks like." Claire felt her throat tighten instantly. Adrian stepped closer, eyes never leaving hers now. "Not money, not status." His voice softened. "Kindness." Claire laughed quietly through the tears already forming. "You really practiced that speech, did not you?" "For 3 weeks." That explains why it sounds expensive. Adrian shook his head, smiling fully now. Then finally, slowly, he reached in his coat pocket one last time, and this time pulled out the small velvet ring box. Claire immediately covered her mouth with one hand. Adrian, I know I met you for the wrong reason. His voice turned quieter now, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. But every good thing in my life started the second you stopped pretending to be impressed by me. He opened the ring box, carefully beneath the warm balcony lights. Claire Bennett. Snow continued falling softly beyond the windows while music drifted upward through the art's center she built from hope and heartbreak and second chances. Will you spend the rest of your life making me a better man than I used to be? Claire stared